consistency is the most important part of any of this content creation, Greg.
Honestly, if you just do it, each week, you're there, you are going to eventually have, sort of a niche audience.
You're listening to the Leading Liberty Podcast, where the rising stars of the freedom movement learn from the top minds in pro-liberty marketing, communication, and activism, what's working and not working right now, so you can do your cause the justice it deserves. And now, your host, Jen Gray.
Welcome to Leading Liberty with Jen Gray. My name is Chris Spangle, and I am filling in for Jen. I found out that she was thinking of going to work at the NSA in episode 26, and frankly, I had to do what was right for all of us libertarians, and I now have her indefinitely detained. I have taken care of her, dear listener, listen, we can't have somebody who's going to work for the NSA be a libertarian, right?
She's a plant.
Now, that is Greg Lenz. He is my co-host on We Are Libertarians. We are completely joking. Jen is not indefinitely detained. She's only detained for the next couple weeks, and she will be back. In the meantime, you are stuck with us. We are the hosts of We Are Libertarians, and we have a much different show than Jen. Our show is much more offensive, immature, unprofessional. I'm really selling it, Greg. I think
we're the South Park to her NPR.
Right. Jen is a respectable member of the libertarian community. We are outcasts. So if you feel like you don't necessarily fit, we're for you. But we have a podcast that is in the top 5% of all podcasts in the entire world. We have 9,000 listeners an episode. That may not sound like a lot, but for podcasting, that is a big audience. That is, we have, as of right now, we're bringing in over $900 a month on our Patreon. We have a Facebook group with 1,300 people in it, a Facebook page of 86,000 people. We have built a great platform over the last 5.5 years. And so what we're going to talk about in this podcast is how to build a successful podcast. And we talked in the last episode of Leading Liberty, and if you have not heard that, please go back and listen to it, on why you need a podcast for your organization, your candidacy, or your personal brand. Because podcasting is a powerful, intimate medium that builds great community, and it gives you the ability to speak to an audience in a bigger way than you probably are right now. So we don't want to convince you that you need a podcast and then not tell you how to do it, Greg.
Absolutely. We have to demonstrate that we actually do have this podcast.
Yeah.
Up until right now, they think we may be frauds.
We could be frauds. Now, if you don't believe us, please go back and go to wearelibertarians.com or iTunes and check us out. Google our podcast. Join our Facebook group. Do all the things that you would do for any podcast.
Do it for Jen.
Do it for Jen. Nobody wants us to succeed more than Jen. So hence us being able to do this show. We hope that we are in her home, so we are not going to be offensive this episode, I promise. Now, by trade, we both work in the digital marketing space, he in the real estate industry and I in the radio industry. And we use those skills to put on a great show and build a great platform. Now, Greg is more of you really are the backbone of the content of the show, especially over the last few years, as I have spent more time working on the platform that we have.
Yeah, sort of division of labor.
Right.
We both took on what we were most interested in at that moment.
Right.
And sort of, amplified our skill sets. So you trusted me to handle the content and keep it libertarian and quality. And then I know that you are better suited in all things technical. And,
right.
because of what your role is at work, you just have a level of knowledge that I couldn't compete with on all things, of audio and visual.
Thank you for complimenting me. I appreciate that. So let's start with the technical aspect. You want to start a podcast. You listened to the last episode and you were convinced that this is going to help your organization, your candidacy, or your personal brand. We guarantee that if you start a podcast and you do it the way that we tell you, that we outline it in this episode, you will see success. You may not be a millionaire. You could be. You may not be. But you will see some intangible or tangible benefits from having a podcast. the first, let's start with the equipment. And this is a dicey area, okay? This is the part that seduces every new podcaster. Everybody loves the equipment. Now, I am definitely one of those people. I am talking into a Shure SM7B. It is a $500 microphone. Greg is talking into an Audio-Technica something or other that is a $400 microphone. We are talking into very nice microphones, are we not?
Oh, absolutely.
We are running it through processors that cost $200 each into a board.
You have a better equipment setup than most local and community radio stations.
Absolutely. And I have a huge board, Greg.
The biggest board, some might say.
People say all the time, my, what a big board you have. And this board is a Mackie Pro FX16 that was $400 or $500, running into a Zoom H6, which is $350. So you may be sitting here going, wow, I don't have that kind of money. You don't need to have that kind of money to start a podcast. You do have to have some money. You can go out and buy an Audio-Technica microphone that plugs into, I wish I had the brand name or the actual, it's basically a $79 microphone on Amazon that is an Audio-Technica microphone that you plug into the USB port of your computer, and you can interview people on Skype or interview local officials on Skype using your computer into a program called Audacity, which is free, and you're off to the races.
We helped a good friend of mine that I introduced you to, Matt Hurd of The Obsessive Viewer. Mm-hmm. You know, I helped him. He wanted to do a podcast, he and his friend Tiny, about movies and film reviews,
right,
and television reviews. And now they have a prominent audience, and that's exactly what Matt used.
Yep.
And you know, now they're 4 years in and doing really well. And now he's got 3 different podcasts.
3 different podcasts. It is an addicting hobby, and it can be an expensive hobby, and it can be something that is very expensive, because the sky's the limit on a lot of this equipment. The reason that we have so much equipment is that we have 4 or 5 people in a room at the same time having conversation, and you have to use a lot of high-end equipment a lot of times to balance out that conversation and make sure that the voice of the microphone isn't bleeding into the other microphone. But that being said, we, for the first 4 or 5 years of this podcast, really for the first 5 years of the podcast, used Shure SM48s. They're like $40 on Amazon. They're great microphones, and we ran those from cheap cables right into an Alesis Multimix 8, which is a great little board that took 4 microphones.
Absolutely. We did it in your basement apartment.
Yep.
And just, had those Guitar Center chords that just ran all over your living room,
right,
and sort of invaded it every Thursday night.
Yes, and then I don't record into a computer. I recorded into the H2, the Zoom H2N, which is about $150 on Amazon. So this is kind of the second tier of equipment. The Shure SM48 at $40 a piece with some, Send It SEND-IT, all one word, cables, which are like $10 a piece, into an Alesis Multimix 8 or some sort of board that will allow you to use USB. I would buy a board that has USB capability, because then you can Skype people in and you want that flexibility. And then I recorded into a Zoom H2N. Now, why did I not record into a computer? I didn't do that because I did record into a computer and I lost too many shows. And it is good to make sure that you have 2 backups. I have 2. I have that Zoom H2N, although I'm on my 3rd one at this point. That is the second tier, and I would record into a computer if you have a good processor on that Audacity program, or if you really want to upgrade, get the Adobe Audition program for $20 a month through Adobe, or get the entire Adobe suite for $50. It's so worth it. If you're going to do what I've done, which is build your own platform without hiring anyone out, without anybody else's help, learning it all on your own, you're going to have to get the Adobe suite, because you're going to need Photoshop and Premiere Pro and Audition, because they're great programs, and you learn those skills by watching things at lynda.com, which is a great little site that teaches you all the technical ins and outs of everything from audio and video recording all the way to WordPress. sites and logo design. It is a great little program that teaches people how to do a lot.
All you need is a work ethic, and
Yes.
you can pick up any skill set you need to produce a successful podcast.
Yes. And so the third tier is what we have, which is, a tier that you really don't need to get to for a while. So if you're starting a podcast, you don't need to worry about that yet. You can send me a message and I'll give you an equipment list at Spangle, Spangle, at WeareLibertarians.com. So if you miss anything, then feel free to hit me up and I will be glad to tell you exactly what we use and how we use it. And some of the mistakes that I've made. We won't even get into video. We do live stream our video, and we use something called the Mevo camera, which is a great little live streaming camera that allows us to switch with an iPad, and it's just a very cool little piece of equipment for, I think it was $400 or $500. And then there's all the little extras like headphones and plugs and cords and a lot of that. And that second and third tier of equipment that I bought that first round of equipment, but we had a lot of it replaced and upgraded by an Amazon wish list. As we built an audience, our audience started asking us for the ability to give them ways to financially support us. So it was the craziest thing in 2015. People just started saying, I really like this show. How can I give you equipment or money?
And that's a great validation of that you produce something of value. That's when once you have the ability to accept donations, that is proof of your concept.
Yes.
And that's when you can scale and use the positive cash flow to grow.
Yes.
You're not profitable yet, but you have revenue. And so you can use that revenue to continue to grow.
Yeah. So now that you know the equipment that you need to start the podcast, you now need to put it on the internet. Okay, you have recorded your first podcast. You're using that Audio-Technica microphone, the USB mic. You've recorded it into Audacity. You've edited it in Audacity. There's a lot of great... Anytime I've ever not known how to do something, I just go to YouTube or Google and ask the question in Google. And so if you don't know how to edit in Audacity, watch a YouTube video, 20 minutes, and you'll be able to figure it out. Or if you want to take that next step and really build your skill set, like I have, which I turned into a career in radio as the digital director for a nationally syndicated radio show because of these skills, then lynda.com is a great place to do that. Now, there are a ton of places to host your file. So now you've edited the file and you have the MP3 file ready to go. The best settings... Okay, you're going to want to write this down too. If you're not taking notes, please start. You're going to want to export it in mono 96441 or 441,000 kilobits per second. And then that is how many waves are in it, essentially. And then 96 or 64 kilobits per second, or megabits per second, I'm apologize, is how much data is in your file. 128 is CD quality. Some people want to put their podcast out at 320 kilobits per second, and it's just way too much information. It's way too much data. It's way too big of a file. I did it at 128 for a long time, and the file was too big, and I realized if I did it at mono 441, 64, or 96, it really didn't sound that much better or worse than if I did it at 128. You don't want to put up a WAV file. You don't want to put an OGG file up or any of these like high quality, super big files. You don't need to do that to your listeners. Be considerate of the bandwidth. 441 is the most. 448 is what a lot of people. And I know this is getting way in the weeds. I apologize. We will get to more fundamentals in a second. But when you go to export your file, you'll see some of these options, and I just want you to click these. Okay. Greg's glazing over, I think.
Well, I mean, this is what I mean. Like, this, so you can repeat the gospel from the heart,
right?
Where I need the Bible in front of me to know it,
right? So but
it's vitally important.
Yeah, it is, because then you're gonna sit there and go, "What's the best?" Listen, just mono 64. That's all you need to do. Now you've got that MP3 file and you're ready to upload it to the internet. Okay, now you need a host. Every website is hosted somewhere. You've heard of web hosting. This is audio hosting. Much like you host your video at YouTube or you host your video at Vimeo or on Facebook. you need an audio host. Now, there are a ton of great hosts out there. You will be tempted to use SoundCloud. We are on SoundCloud, but as a support, okay? We are on SoundCloud because people are on SoundCloud and we want to be in that space. I do not ever recommend that you use SoundCloud as your main driver of audio hosting. I use a company called Fireside.fm, like Fireside Chats. I find them to be the fastest, most reliable, super easy to send in support tickets and get a response back in a day type company. The front end, if you put a link out on your Facebook and you say, go listen to my podcast here, the website looks beautiful. You don't need to build yourself a website. It looks really good. It's built by a guy named Dan Benjamin of the 5x5 Network. It is so, and he is a podcaster, a professional podcaster and software developer from Austin, Texas, and he built the perfect podcasting platform, in my opinion. A lot of people like Libsyn, Libsyn. It's a good product. A lot of people like to use what we did forever was put it on the back end of our website and feed it through PowerPress and Blueberry, which is perfectly acceptable too. As we got bigger, I had to move to a dedicated audio host because we were just getting big. Podbean, I know, is very popular. Our friends at the Lions of Liberty use Podbean, and it's a really good host as well. But I just prefer Fireside.fm. Use a host that is dedicated towards podcasting. You're going to get a better bang for your buck. You don't want to host it at, like, Squarespace will host podcasts, but they're not a podcast host. They're doing it as an add-on feature, and you want to make sure that your file is hosted and accessed at a place that is dedicated to the podcast industry. What about some of these free places like SoundCloud or like Anchor? Well, yeah, you can use one of these free services for a little bit because a lot of people don't do more than 15 episodes because they do it for 6 months and go, wait a minute, I've done all this work and I'm not rich yet. And so they stop doing their podcast around episode 10 or 15. If you want to try out podcasting and see how it feels, use an Anchor or use a SoundCloud. But if you're going to take it seriously, and you know you're going to take it seriously, then spend the money. Spend the $20 a month on Fireside.fm. It is worth the money. It is going to help you look more professional. Now they are going to help you syndicate your feed. So then you're going to take that RSS feed. A little website is created with an enclosed, what's called an enclosure, and it syndicates your feed in RSS. This is the technical part, the web part that I'm not technically great at, but you take the RSS feed and you put that in iTunes using Apple Connect, at Google Play and their podcast, at Stitcher, at Fireside has a lot of links where you can put those links for things like Overcast and Pocket Cast, and some of the players, they will help you syndicate that feed. So now you are on the internet. And let me say, if you don't put your podcast on iTunes, you don't have a podcast. All right. The 75% of our listeners listen to us via iTunes, and 90% of those are on the Apple Podcast app that is native to the iPhone. So if you're not on iTunes, and most of the podcasts feed from the library that iTunes has. So if you, like, I use Downcast to listen to podcasts. They feed from the iTunes library. So you've got to be on iTunes. That, if you're on nothing else, just get on iTunes. You're like, I can't figure this out, get on iTunes and do it that way. So that is the technical part. Okay, that's all the really, like, boring part, okay? We probably should have started that second.
The people who are going to start a podcast, that's the part they're going to listen to.
That's the part they're confused on.
The people who are going to keep thinking about it, this might be their part.
Yes, so I'm starting a podcast about podcasting sometime in the next month. This is September of 2017. It's called Podcasting and Platforms. And you can subscribe to it at podcastingandplatforms.com. This is extra incentive to get the website done in the next week because I haven't finished the website as of right now. And there are also, the Podcast Answer Man, or, Ask the Podcast Coach, or there's just a bunch of great podcasts about podcasting. A guy named Dave Jackson is really a guy that I listen to a lot, or Dan Benjamin at 5x5 has something called the Podcast Method. I like that show too. So those are great podcasts about podcasting, and there's a bunch of courses out there, but I'm starting a podcast about podcasting at some point. I'm mentioning this without having finished the website. I've done an episode, but I haven't done the first episode of this new podcast about podcasts that I'm doing. I'm mentioning this here even though I don't have the project finished. And this is one of the first things that I always tell new podcasters. You aren't ever going to get anything in the equipment or the show or the web presence that you have to your liking ever. You have to just do it. You have to ship the product. And
if you're not embarrassed by the first thing you put out, then you spent too much time.
Yes. You are going to, as a baby podcaster, go back and edit out every and you're going to overthink it, and you're going to think this is horrible, and who's going to listen to this? And you're right. Nobody's going to listen to the first few episodes.
But that's the beauty of it.
That's important, because no one's listening, so you can mess up and you can learn. I can tell you, if you go back and listen to the beginnings of We're Libertarians, it's a much different show than it is now. And that's because we evolved over 5.5 years. That first year, we had done, I think, 30 episodes, and we had 72 listeners in the first year of doing the podcast. We did 5 years. And we had, so when it got to election season of 2016, we still only had 2,000 to 2,500 listeners an episode. Then over the last year, we've added 1,000 people a month. It's been amazing. It's been super fast growth that we really did not totally expect, but
all growth is.
Right.
That's why it's so impossible to pick winners. It's really difficult to determine who's going to be the standout. But once there is one, it is exponential.
It took us about 205 episodes to be successful.
Yeah. That's the amount of time it takes to be good at what you do.
Right.
To produce interesting content and quality content.
If you want to become a content creator, you have to do what you love for free for a while.
Absolutely. And
consistency is the most important part of any of this content creation, Greg.
Honestly, if you just do it, and even if you aren't that proud of it, you just, each week, you're there. It's in their feed. They see it over and over.
Yep.
You are going to eventually have a boutique or, sort of a niche audience. It's just inevitable that that's going to materialize because you stick to it. Woody Allen said it best when he said 80% of life is just showing up.
Yep. And that's what podcasting is about. It's just about doing it over and over and over and being consistent. We made a promise to our audience that we would do the podcast weekly. And so we started the podcast in March of 2012. Well, in 2014, I got divorced, and I was emotionally unable to do the podcast every single week during that year because it was very tough. Now, fortunately, I had friends like Greg and Joe and some of our other co-hosts who were willing to step up and do a podcast for me. So I was able to do my own thing a little bit, but we weren't weekly. And we got yelled at so often by our audience for saying that we were a weekly show and then not putting out a weekly show.
Yeah, we got shamed into consistency.
Yes, we really did. I mean, it really wasn't.
I'm glad.
I am too, because in 2016, when we started being really consistent about that weekly episode, that's when we really started to grow.
Yeah, absolutely. And, our content, focus is more conducive to weekly.
Yes.
It is because it's current events. And so we don't necessarily have to come up with topics or proactively search. They kind of come to us. And then, if we're annoyed by it or if there's something we feel needs to be said about it, we take it on as a topic for discussion.
Yeah.
Now, other areas, like interviewing, more interview specific type of models are the same way. Like you reach out, you build your schedule and you do it, and you're not as dependent upon being constantly coming up with the ideas and being the sole content producer.
Yeah.
So that would be what I would advise people to look for. If you're going to do it, don't just look at it as a soapbox.
Yep.
Because you're going to be exhausted and you're going to be out of ideas. No one's interesting enough to do 52 weeks of just their thoughts for 2 hours.
And nobody that is listening is going to care all that much because you're doing it for you. And listen, we did the show for us for 4 years before we really started realizing the idea that people get something out of this.
Then you start getting questions about how to think about things.
Yeah.
Or like Tom Woods suggesting, your show as a good entry level for younger libertarians, and you're like, whoa, wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Whoa, people are paying attention to us.
Tom Woods.
But we realized that what we were really offering the audience is the ability for them to sound smarter when they talk with their friends.
Yes.
To
become the resource.
Yes. And so when we really started to hone in on our content, because what we were doing for our listener was making them sound smart. Okay, well, let's do more of that.
Yeah.
And as we have done that, we have really started to take off.
And that's how you amplify your effect too.
Yeah.
By creating your evangelists basically.
Right.
They're your early adopters, and they are the most passionate about your product and the people who shout it from mountaintops and go out and expose it.
Right.
And so if you can turn those individuals into people that other people look up to, it necessarily compounds out and turns into a situation where you have this amplification of message and thought leadership that starts bringing people in from. If you look at where we attract people, I am stunned because it's not always where we would expect. We have people that are hardcore big government rhino Republicans that listen, that are hold elected office.
Yep.
So it's always alarming to me that it started out as us fumbling our way through how to do a good show and mentally unpacking ideas and commentary, but then in time, as you refine your craft, it just slowly matriculates into a situation where it's huge.
Everything in life is about repetitions. It's podcast growth is the same as muscle growth. I haven't really worked out the last couple months, and I'm getting fat again. I'm getting flabby. I'm not as hard as I was in terms of my arms.
Pressure's required to maintain.
Yeah, and so by not doing the same amount of repetitions, I'm not getting the same results that I was. And podcasting is the same way. The more reps you do, the better you will become. And that is the key to anything in terms of your career or life. Like, if you want to get good at something, you just got to say, I'm going to do it. I'm not going to make excuses. I'm just going to continue to do reps, do this over and over and over. And over the course of that, you will learn new things. And for me, I've been able to articulate this because I have tried to work on my physical health the last year. And going to the gym and lifting weights, and that process of training my mind has been so parallel to growing this podcast.
Absolutely. And it's funny. It's also important too to not force your vision and be rigid when you're starting out.
Right.
Because you can't tell. One thing I kept saying to you early on is we don't know what We Are Libertarians is yet.
Yep.
We know we enjoy it. We know that it's growing, but if you've ever seen the movie The Social Network, there's a line where it's a big party. We just don't know. We don't know if it's cool yet.
Did we want to be a news service for libertarians? Did we want to be a comedy podcast?
Strictly reporting?
Did we want to just
interviews
that we didn't know? So we just tried a bunch of different things until we really found what we felt like was the formula.
Yeah, it's for us. It was sort of narrowing down and testing things out. Interviews have never been our forte, purely because we're not that interested in it. But for a lot of people, it's a great way to build out a thought base and an intellectual base by talking to experts until you sort of assume their expertise and become one yourself.
Yeah, well, I mean, our biggest episode was when we interviewed Ron Paul in 2013.
And got on the front page of what was that? The media,
the Blaze, Mediaite, and
Mediaite.
Huffington Post. Yeah. So the other reason we don't do a lot of interviews is that that's what a lot of other people do. And people like Tom Woods have. Jen does something very specific. She does interviews, but she found a difference in the marketplace. So in the marketplace of libertarian podcasts, there are a lot of people that do interviews, but nobody does interviews around the actual nuts and bolts of politics like Jen does. And so that's why Jen has been able to grow an audience. She found a niche and she did it differently. For us, our niche within the libertarian podcasting world is that we are the closest thing to a comedy podcast that I think the Liberty Movement has. It's not that we're comedians like the part of the problem guy, Dave Smith. He's an actual comedian who does a libertarian podcast. That's not us. We're a blend of like Howard Stern meets National Review and Reason. You know?
Yeah,
like,
I mean, I think that the best political shows, even Meet the Press or like a Firing Line, humor was still an important element because that's what makes it easily listened to, and you come back for because it's fun and entertaining. And if you take that element away, then it becomes, documentaries.
Yep.
And that not a lot of people have that an appetite for just constant documentaries. Right. And then also as well, I don't think that our style of humor is so much different as it is modern. Mm-hmm. Because taste in humor change.
Right.
And so it wouldn't make sense if we did Tim Allen style humor, and that would not feel natural to us. We're products of the millennial generation. We grew up with shock and awe, and so that's, as a byproduct, our sense of humor.
Right. I mean, we're writing our Irma jokes as we speak. We're doing a live podcast on 9/11.
Yeah.
Because when we tell people that we're doing a live show at a comedy club on 9/11, they laugh.
Yeah.
We're not going to make jokes about 9/11. It's funny that it's on 9/11. And so we that is our differentiator between us and our competitors. Like, I don't consider people like Mark Claire or Roger Paxton or Jason Stapleton or Tom Woods or Johnny Rocket, I don't consider them like competition. We promote each other. We're friends with each other. But, for your libertarian podcast attention, we do compete. And so I can't interview the same people that Mark and that Johnny and that Tom Woods interview because, like, Tom Woods is going to be a better interviewer than I am. You want to find your niche and you want to differentiate yourself from the people that are in that space. Like, if you want to start a podcast about podcasting, there's a guy named the Podcast Answer Man. And so what I see people do is do a variation of the Podcast Answer Man, even in the name of their show, like the Podcasting Answer Man. It's like, dude, nobody's going to listen to you because you're just a clone. And that's authenticity, as we talked about in the last episode, was so important. You've got to be authentic in the way that you present your podcast. Another reason, another thing that I think has made us stick around is that we have fun. We have fun with each other. It's one of our favorite nights of the week is when we get together on Thursday nights, which is important. We know every Thursday night at 7 p.m. we're doing a podcast. Unless, like, this coming week I say, no podcast this week, you can do whatever you want on a Thursday night. Otherwise, Greg, Kat, Harry, they know to be here.
And we know our backup is traditionally either Friday afternoon or Saturday midday.
Exactly. We've talked through that stuff. So we know that we're going to do a podcast that week. It's going to be on this day, and we just block it out in our schedules. And it is fun to get together and hang out with each other. We also rotate about 20 different people in. We have 4 to 5 people on every episode. It's always Greg and I. Kat and Harry are here a lot, and then that other person or two is always one of the same people. And so what we've built is this our own little ecosystem. And the foundation of comedy for millennials is building a character and then playing the characters off of each other. Not so much dad jokes. Like, we've labeled dad jokes, because the way that humor worked in our grandparents' or parents' generation is different than the way it's working in ours. It's much more interpersonal. And so we have to have somebody like a Bittner. Bittner is somebody who has very distinct characteristics that we make fun of. Bittner is our friend. I get made fun of all the time for a bunch of different things. Greg gets made fun of for different... We tease each other, just like you tease your friends. We are a social group that is just airing certain parts of the social interaction on the podcast. So we are friends who all have an excuse to hang out with each other. For some of you, it's that you may not want to replicate what we've done, but you want to replicate the fun. That's the way that our personalities, I'm an ENFJ, he's an ENFP, Kat's an ENFP. Like, we love people. We love hanging out with each other. You may be more of an introvert, and you may love research, and then you may write out a script for your podcast, and then do that podcast like Roger Paxton does with the Lava Flow podcast, and that is your crack.
And that is who you will attract.
Right.
You know, you have to be someone that for the people who are into that kind of thing, that's the kind of thing they're into.
Right.
And so you will draw those in, and that'll be refreshing for you as well.
Yeah.
You know, whatever you do, let it, you know, we like to have fun. We're irreverent. But the fun has what has kept us going, and us looking forward to it.
Because for our co-host, I knew, and I still always keep an eye on this. I know that while I am the head of it, I am the one who puts the 20 hours of work into it. I'm the one who puts tens of thousands of dollars into it. I'm also the one that makes the money when it comes in, but I also spend it. I'm like...
It's your venture.
It's my venture. But to get those 20 people to be involved in it, I know that there has to be some incentive for those people. And, you know, for Greg, it's the opportunity to... You know, well, you'd say, what is the incentive that you have to be involved in something that is... Essentially, you go, no, this is yours, but I'm going to be a part of it. Mm-hmm. You know, like,
well, it works easier that way. If you're going to do it as a partnership, someone has. I'm wildly against like partnerships. Like it needs to be someone's baby,
right? Who
has the vision for it, and then someone who just enjoys it. You know, which is more for me. You know, it's really important to me. Like my purpose is, I want to shape what I consider to be sort of, you know, libertarian thought, conservative, you know, right-wing politics thought of America. And I think that there is a hollow spot for millennial thought leadership in politics.
Right.
And that's the voice I want us to fill. I want us to shape that. And so that's what I find rewarding. I enjoy the humor, but I would always do it regardless, because I feel like this is a way to do that, to make that dent in the universe.
And like our younger co-host, Kat, she's 20, and I'll say this because she'll never hear this. She loves the attention.
Right.
She
it's
is
the fame.
She literally got mad at her sorority sister, stood up and said, "I do not need to take this. I am on a podcast." You know, like for her, it gives her social standing.
I had 35 shares last week. I will not listen to you guys. But I'm upset.
But she also does it because we're friends. Like she is friends with Greg and friends with me, and she gets things out of that relationship. You know, and our audience, we've just added her in the last couple months. Our audience has fallen in love with her. I love her. Greg, you could take her or leave her, right?
Well, you know, she's here.
Right. But
she's clean.
she's a great entertainer. She just has that natural entertaining ability. And so for her, the intangible is that she gets to express herself through this format. It's exactly what she wants to do. And so if you're starting a podcast and you're going to have co-hosts, you've got to make sure that you are always making sure that they are getting something out of it. Whether it's, and I like, for me, if you can pay people, I don't pay them anything, because what I offer any of my contributors on as writers or as podcast co-hosts, I don't get paid. It costs me a lot of money. I'm putting it right back into building a platform, and by your association with this platform, you get exposure. Now, there are other people who say, your time is worth X amount of dollars to me, so I'm going to give you money. And that would probably, you know, that's how other people do it, and that's fine.
If you're getting into podcasting to make money, you're not going to succeed.
You are sadly mistaken. You're going to have,
because you're not going to have, the runway is so long, you'll never make it to liftoff.
It will take a decade for We Are Libertarians to support full-time incomes. If that.
But that's the thing, though, is it materializes in other ways, in other opportunities.
Absolutely.
You know, it is an exposure medium, but not necessarily where we intend to capture financial gain.
Right.
You know, it's a cross subsidy, if you will.
Yeah.
Where this is a free this exposure is a free subsidy for whatever we're able to monetize it down the road and in an indirect way.
If Greg wants to become a speaker or an author or start his own project,
a meme artist,
he has a better chance of doing that because he is associated with our platform. And so that is the compensation that I offer. And, you know, I'm very clear about that. I'm very express about that. Like, I will help you in any way as achieve your goals as you are helping me achieve mine. And it's a mutual thing. You know, if Greg wrote a book and we're selling a book, we'd promote the hell out of the book, because Greg has done nothing but help promote me and this thing. And it's really our thing, you know what I mean? Like I always try to run as much as I can by, the core of our podcast group. So,
but it is important, like because of my previous experiences in like business ventures and those types of things, I cannot stress enough how important it is that if you're going to partner up with people, make sure someone has full authority.
Yep.
And it's about finding the right blend of personalities,
yes.
because it's unusual to find people who, we've gotten really lucky with the ensemble we've been able to put together of personalities. Yeah. And the ones who have been more opportunistic have weeded themselves out very quickly.
Yes.
And we haven't even had to be proactive about it. They just get frustrated because we just enjoyed doing it, and it was never our focus to turn it into money.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And the co-host,
but that's rare.
The co-host roster has changed over the years. Like, yeah, I mean, you're going to have evolutions, and right now I'm recruiting new co-hosts. I want to find new people because I want to keep it fresh for our audience. We do the same thing, but differently kind of every time. We don't even really know if the episode that we do is going to turn out to be more comedy or more information or more opinion or more news, or, we kind of feel our way through it, but, we obviously prep, but it's, every show you walk away going, that was a great show, or that was terrible. I mean, you kind of don't really know how a show is going to turn out before you do it.
It's got to be for us, it's got to be the right amount of preparation, but without the rigidity of structure.
Right.
Because we tend to meander our way into very interesting conversations, and when it's very structured and rigid, we tend to repeat what we've said before and tell people what to think, but we're not all that interested in it, and you can tell.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's much so, if you're someone that's going to produce a show, rather than making it about telling people what to think, the hardest talent I've ever seen, or skill I've ever seen that's tough to find, is the ability to ask the right and relevant questions.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's not important. A lot of people can give you the right opinion on something.
Right.
But if you can find sort of the foundational questions on something, you can create, and that spreads to any media or any topic of interest. If you can ask the right questions about it, you will have the fuel to be consistent.
Right.
It needs to be fun, so you look forward to it, and then you need that fuel, whether it's topic-centered like us with news and current events, or if it's philosophy, you run into a dry spot.
Yep.
But as long as you're able to ask yourself the right question and look at it that way, where you're asking yourself a question to do a podcast or an episode, you'll be able to continue.
The thing that I've found is, and I think it was, maybe you told me this about PJ O'Rourke, or maybe I read the quote somewhere, about writing columns. He just writes what pisses him off.
Yeah, William F. Buckley was the same way.
Yeah.
They both just got annoyed a lot.
Right. And so for us, it's like, I structure the show, and I say, here's the topics. If Greg says, no, I'd rather talk about this, because both of us have to be interested in the topic to talk about it. Although there will be times where we will do a topic that I'm just so bored with. But
when we get into the weeds on economic theory, but that's understandable.
I tune out, and so,
who wouldn't?
So right. So, but you people love it. So I know that I'm going to tune out. So I try and find a co-host that night that is interested in economics, that can play with Greg, who's really into that.
And then you can monitor us and break us up when we go too into the weeds.
Right. And I ask questions going, hey, I don't know a lot about that. And so the other part of this, so to kind of recap, you've got to be consistent. Our consistency, Greg, meant that to do these two shows for Jen and the third one coming up, you and I had no discussion about what we were really going to talk about. Just here's the topic: the importance of podcasting and how to podcast. You came over, we sat down, and we turned on the microphones and started talking. Mm-hmm. We don't need to sketch it all out, because we know we can jive with each other, and we also know that we know the information.
Right.
And I can tell when to stop talking so you can start talking. Even so, sometimes we use hand signals still, but you build with that consistent co-host a rhythm that you just kind of don't need to articulate a lot of stuff.
You just get better at your skill, whatever skill it is.
Right.
And that's something you'll develop. And I would recommend, you talked about all the technical specifications that are necessary, and that's the foundation.
Right.
You get the foundation, then it becomes, what do I want it to be? But also, balance that with, don't try to make it rigid and fixate on your original design. Test things and then, see what actually ends up getting traction. And then once it gets traction to the point people are willing to send you donations and you can upgrade, use those donations rather than to personally reimburse yourself, put that right back in to your venture.
Yep.
And use that as the fuel, the product, the fuel to build out your actual technical setup. And then as well, make sure that you're always exposing yourself to differing opinions and conflict things that challenge your worldview or maybe open you up to a new worldview. Because that's another thing is people just run dry because they sort of have a fixed view of the world.
Yeah, so be consistent, have fun doing it, be flexible, be elastic in your approach. Listen to your audience and don't get obsessed with the stats. Don't get obsessed with buying new equipment. Make sure that you sound really professional. The other part is a good web presence helps a lot. When we built a WordPress website in 2014, that really helped jump our numbers a lot. By a lot, I mean we went from 72 listeners to almost overnight we started growing by, I think we're up to 700 by the end of that year, maybe 1,500 by the end of the next. We started doubling our audience every year until 2016. And I think that's because we had a website, we had a web presence, so people could Google search Libertarian Podcast and find us. And I cannot stress to you the importance of artwork. Remember the things that we did that helped us pop. Professional artwork. I wrote an SEO article that listed the top Libertarian podcasts that gets 20 or 30 hits a day. We started being more consistent. We started to really focus on what we felt was our brand and offering our listener what they wanted after 5 years of learning and listening. And, making sure that we're having fun doing it. And then, so artwork is really important. Like if your artwork looks like crap, and I'm still not done with our art. It will always kind of evolve and change. But I designed the artwork to mimic those totalitarian styles of the early 20s and 30s and 40s because it's eye-catching and it's ironic for a libertarian podcast to joke about a dictator and like one of our groups, the
very neat and ordered pro-liberty,
right? And it's spawned memes and it's very funny, So it's.
But that's us,
right? It's part of the character of the group, but the artwork I think is still just not done. But none of this is ever done. I'm like, you know what? I got to do it. I got to ship it. I got to put it out in the world and then work. I'll bolt the wings on as this plane starts taking off, and I can't, because if you sit there and wait for great to happen, you're not going to do, therefore great can never happen. Mm-hmm. And that is the most important part of podcasting. You've got to do it over and over in a consistent way, and then you will get great at it. And all of the goals that you had when you started out will start taking place, but you've got to be consistent.
And one thing I would recommend is if you're going to start one, because this is a how-to, is you need the technical. Chris did a wonderful job covering the technical, and I think we've done a pretty good job being an idea factory.
The content of it.
Yeah, and then how to build a coherent brand and consistent brand that, represents what you want to represent.
Yeah.
And so one book I would read, even though I know people hate books, is 4 Steps to Epiphany.
Mm-hmm.
That is a book about once you're producing content consistently, the reason consistency and the amount of content is so important is it gives you the opportunity to test and refine and iterate. And so it is a good book to guide you through a step-by-step process to figure out your model and what works, and throw away what doesn't. And that would be my number one thing. That would be the number one book I would recommend to anyone to read.
Yeah, I would say that for me, the 2 books that I would recommend to people are Platform by Michael Hyatt and Content Inc. by Joe Polizzi.
Yep. Which is actually the application of the model in 4 Steps to Epiphany.
Really?
to content production.
Okay.
Yeah, this was like a PhD. This was a dissertation written back in Silicon Valley back in like 1981.
Who's the author of
I
it?
think it's named Steve Blank, I believe. I mean, he's a guy that was a college dropout and now teaches at Stanford.
Steve Blank. What's he hiding from? Why won't he tell us his last name? One of the podcasts in terms of branding that I love is Donald Miller's Story Brand podcast. I think it's all one word, but Donald Miller does a great job of helping you refine your branding and marketing message. There's a bunch of podcasts by Joe Pulizzi out there where he talks about content, but really his book, Content Inc., is it's like had I just read that book 5 years ago, I wouldn't have had 5 years of struggling to get to where I am now, but I'm glad for it because I'm an experiential learner as opposed to a learner.
Which is the entire model is,
Right.
that lean startup model is
Yeah.
the constant testing.
A
Failure.
book by Eric Ries, which is a very famous book.
Yep.
And so I think that's been a podcast that has helped kind of with our brand and helping me kind of formulate what We Are Libertarians is and how it is different than the competition. We use Facebook Messenger as the back end of our podcast. That's how we communicate with each other. We're starting to experiment with Trello.
I still don't think that's a very good project management system.
It isn't at all, but that's what has worked for us.
That's what one person wants to use, and so we accommodate.
Trello. You're saying Trello?
Yeah, Trello.
Yeah, no. Facebook Messenger is
To me, that's the best way to make sure that everyone's on page and
Right.
communicating. But it's not good for planning.
Yeah. I mean, mostly it's just like send that person a message and just stay on top of that stuff and keep it all in your personal organizational stuff. But titling. I'm trying to think of anything that I haven't covered. Titling is incredibly important as we have tried to title our episodes to be more. So I learned from somebody at work that like if you're a character and you're a podcast like us, do an episode around a current event and put that title in the YouTube title, and that will get you way more views because YouTube is the world's second largest search engine. I have noticed on our podcast stats that when I title a podcast around something that is being discussed in the national narrative, or with a clickbaity title, which I tried to not do because that turns people off, it gets more downloads than, other things. So like
It's just a bigger search market.
right. So for instance, sorry to date this episode, but like Hurricane Irma right now is taking place. And right now, if we put out a podcast with that title in it, then that would be more downloaded because it's a very hot topic right now.
Absolutely. You're keyword hacking for growth. Basically.
Exactly right. So that is one thing that I have noticed is important is make sure that you have clean and consistent titles in all of your episode. Consistency in the organization of your website and your podcast feed and all of that is super important. I'm obsessive about making sure that like our number structure is all the same. So like one episode is 001 and the next episode is 2 and the next one is 03. That drives people crazy. You have to make sure that you are OCD compliant in everything that you do. I spend a ton of time making sure that I don't turn off the OCD. Members of our audience, I have become a stickler for making sure that the same color is used across that the same logos are used, that the same titling and everything is used across all the platforms because you don't want to give somebody the slightest reason to tune you out. And so if somebody looks at your numbering structure, for instance, and says, this is very annoying, I'm not listening, then they'll get rid of you. Mm-hmm. So you have to be OCD compliant in your podcast. That is, so I think that's kind of, that's covered it all.
One thing, last little bit, if you get in a rut where you just feel kind of stale, just on principle once in a while, do a contrarian. So whatever your focus is, or if maybe it's news or libertarianism,
right.
Just out of nowhere, I'm going to do an episode that is the exact polar opposite belief. And challenge yourself because that intellectual exercise will freshen up.
Yep.
It'll freshen you up in what you're excited in and maybe help you find new ideas for content in the application. Which is why we jokingly, some of the books I like and some of the people I look to for marketing ideas.
You mean Hitler?
Adolf. It's so contrarian to libertarianism, but like I do that out of a practice. I force myself to, so I'm always exposing myself to new avenues for ideas, for show topics, and for how to think about things, and refine what our offering is.
And I will say on consistency, like this next week, we've done a lot of podcasting this past week. We've got one show on Monday night, and we're all hanging out this weekend. And like I know we're gonna need a break this week, so we're not doing an episode Thursday. Give yourself a break. So like in a week, we're a weekly show. We do 2 episodes a week, but we just started that, so we've done probably 48 shows a year out of the 52 weeks, or as low as 45 shows, just because you get sick of each other and you just go, I need a break this week. Don't be afraid to take a 1-week break. Like that's why we're doing this for Jen, because Jen's done it and she's been very consistent about it, but she's got some other priorities that she's got to take care of. And so she wants to be consistent for you guys, so she's asked us to carry the load while she just doesn't have to think about it. Mm-hmm. You've got to have that little bit of a break. So make sure that you do take breaks, because you don't want to burn yourself out.
Exactly.
So that's important too. So
because otherwise you'll grow to resent it.
Yes.
And if you go the ensemble route and you're looking for contributors and that type of thing, prioritize culture over beliefs. You don't necessarily want people, like, don't target people to bring in as collaborators that have a belief you're trying to get, or a worldview you're trying to bring in and adopt, other than on a one-off. Focus on cultural fit. If you don't want to take a long road trip with the people on your podcast, then you don't want them on there long term.
Well, we've got some people to address then. All right, so thank you so much for listening. If you want to get in touch with us, you can get in touch with us at wearelibertarians.com. Please check out our show. We'd love for you to check it out. We're irreverent, we're fun, we think you will like the show, and as my final thought, not everybody likes our show, and if you're going to put yourself out there in the world, and the other book that I would recommend is The Gifts of Imperfection by Brene Brown, or Scary Close by Donald Miller. They're books about emotional stability and creativity, and just putting things out in the world and creating. And when you do that, the certain portion of the population is going to go, you're terrible, I hate what you created, no thank you. And so you need to just have the emotional fortitude to go, you know what? This isn't going to emotionally affect me. It's okay. It's okay that person doesn't like me. And then you put their face on a meme that shames their entire family.
I get more enjoyment out of who I'm disliked by than who I'm liked by.
Yeah, that's abnormal.
Is it?
I'm a people pleaser to the max, and most people are too, I think.
I don't know. I guess that's a weird thing. Like, I generate much more satisfaction by who I'm disliked by than who I'm liked by. And that is something to maybe keep in mind as you put yourself out there.
Boy, you are one satisfied fellow.
I know. I just keep winning. It's too much winning. No, I'm kidding. No, but that is something to think about. Keep that mindset in mind, because the world is pretty cruel, and everybody's a critic and everybody's an expert, but they don't produce anything.
Yep.
And so you're the man or the woman in the arena, and you need to remember to only value the opinions of those who have what you want, or who have walked where you want to walk.
Yep.
Anyone else is just a talker.
Yep. And so, yeah, it's been fun and rewarding, and it's given me purpose, especially at a time and a period in my life where I desperately needed an outlet to put all my energy, and it has given me friendship when I desperately needed it.
Even sometimes when you wish it would take a break.
There's a lot of forced friendship sometimes from our group. So it is, but yeah, it's been a rewarding process, and I recommend it to everybody. I think that it has been a ton of fun, and check out our show. You may not like it, and if you don't, that's fine. But
it's going to make me happy.
Yeah, it'll make him happy. And I may question every decision we've ever made. I'll go, maybe we need to change this. And Greg will, nope, we're not changing anything.
Just write LOL real big.
Right. So Jen will be back here in a couple weeks. We will rejoin. You will rejoin us next week in the next episode. We have a yet to be determined episode that we're going to plan out and give to you next week. So please be sure to join us. We hope that you're enjoying our little interlude here for Jen. And we thank Jen for giving us the opportunity to come and talk to her audience, and we hope that you guys are getting something out of it. And if you have any questions, please don't be afraid to ask. Editor@WeareLibertarians.com gets both Greg and I.
Shoot us a message on Facebook.
Yep.
You know, we'll do our best to respond as quickly as possible.
Yeah, so please feel free to contact us if you heard of anything and you need a recommendation or any of that kind of stuff. Get in touch. So we'd love to talk to you. So until next week, we appreciate you listening, and we will see you next week.
Hey, did you like this episode? Be sure to subscribe, rate, and review. Learn more about how to market pro-liberty causes and campaigns over at jengray.com, and I'll see you on the inside.